who dug into one issue or in two issues. I'm not covering anything. I'm doing the stuff I want. Yeah? And as you said, we are also content generators. Yeah? Recently, the Wall Street Journal was complaining that sort of the content generators have the cost and the aggregators have the benefit of the whole thing. Yeah? But this is the thing is, I mean, now the blogosphere is being split up. Yeah? I mean, you have every topic covered, and I say there's a specialist blog, as you said, a calculated risk. Yeah? You'll find several that do nothing else than the Federal Reserve. You find me, who does nothing more else than the ECB and monetary policy in Europe. And this is where I wonder where we are going to get a connect. Yeah? Because so far I see that media, I have the feeling you're a bit jealous. We are very clear in sourcing. Yeah? Whenever I take a piece from the Financial Times, I link to it so people see the original source to it. And I see more what the commercial media is doing. You are reporting the things, and we are explaining it. Sort of, I take the same press release as you do, yeah. But whereas you sort of just shorten it into it, I put additional chapters inside, yeah, saying what this means, and this is actually why people read blogs and why I have a growing leadership. Thank you.
So, the future of blogs, is this where it's at? How do we deal with them? How do we analyze them? You want to follow up on this, Raymond? Yes. Okay, since he's here beside me.
Just one follow-up to that. I think it's an interesting observation, but what you're really trying to say is that not what people like blogs instead of newspapers, what people want is analysis and context on the facts that are available out there. And I think that is where really the added value is, and whether that is in a newspaper or print or a website or a blog, I don't think that really matters. It's the analysis and the context that you need. And that is, as a financial journalist, I think, a very big responsibility. It's easy for everybody to get the facts, the figures, the earnings results, but the implication of what that means, a first paragraph in a story without the actual figure, with words only, putting it into the context, that is where the added value is in financial journalism. And that's where you need a certain level of expertise, of education, of background, of experience in terms of in order to be able to make that judgment.
Well, the blogs only exist because the newspapers didn't provide them. The newspapers could have done this easily. And if you look at the greatest blogs, almost in any field, a few of them are in newspapers. You know, I like Paul Krugman's blog, great blog. And AlphaVal, you say, good blog. And my colleague Willem Beuter has a wonderful blog on the FT. But generally, the newspapers are not the greatest places where the bloggers are. You're not are you in a newspaper, or you're?
I used to be a financial journalist.
That's right, but your blog is not your blog is not run by and hosted by a newspaper. Your blog is, that's the point. And many newspapers tend to be not very good at this. Actually, they have not spotted this trend. So you see, most of the bloggers are independent.
I think the independence too is probably very important, because there's not a lot of time where perhaps the journalists can actually give the in-depth analysis that they might want to get, because then it's very much opinion rather than fact. So there's that fine line. I think they have to constantly be just watching and making sure that they're not jeopardizing their sort of objectivity in a way. I want to just, you haven't met Jason here. We do have our economist in place here who is also talking about that insider information. And I think you might be interested to hear what he says too.
Thank you. So my question is something we were discussing actually in the break, was the fact that right now there's sort of a clamoring for positive news, right? So basically the economy in the US, in Europe, globally, not in a good place. The unemployment rate's going to go up significantly over the next year plus. It seemed to be in sort of an informal discussion we had that it's kind of the inverse of it. If it bleeds, it leads right now. And so people are looking for those small kernels of positive data, right? Whereas the economic truth is that what's going on right now is that the positive growth we're seeing is economic stimulus, and the stock market is being pushed higher by expectations of increased productivity and efficiency. Translation, do more with less equals fewer jobs. Right? So when we're talking about the crisis, we've heard numerous times, we had the survey yesterday, who thinks it's getting worse, almost a unanimous vote. We're talking about now sort of ex post facto, what did we do about the crisis, what did we do right? My question is, we know it's getting worse. We know that the job market's going to get worse. Things are not rosy and good. So what are we going to do about covering the crisis that's not yet over, that's going to impact more individual people in a significant way in the coming months and years?
Aye, aye, aye. And again, I think what we talk about in the market too is the sentiment in the market. And nobody wants to be the one that actually says it's going to get worse. It's not a good headline at the moment. Nobody wants to run that headline. If anything, we've seen, I think, in the last few months, maybe the overplay of the green shoots. The green shoots, they were green shoots for a long time. They never went anywhere. Another comment quickly here, and then I'm putting it back to the top table.
The other thing is, you know, it's not just things are bad and they're going to get worse. It's going to take 2 or 3 years for GDP to exceed 2008 levels, right? Even the IMF says U.S., European economic growth, at best, you're equal to 2008 levels in 2011. It probably won't be until 2012. You know, we're talking 2 or 3 years from now it gets better. But what you've seen is a big change in the last few years in how people view financial journalism. In the last recession, people didn't know who the Fed chair was. There weren't multiple networks you could watch on TV. People weren't Googling financial data. There weren't blogs. But now everyone is watching this spectator sport called the global economy, and they want it. We want to win. We all have skin in the game, and we want to win fast, like we do in most sporting events. How do we deal with the fact that the actual headline is, it's going to suck. It's going to suck for a while?
Okay, new headline for us. Wolfgang, you want to pick up on this one?
It is with anyone who watches an economy on a constant basis, not all indicators move in tandem. I mean, unemployment is a lagging indicator. We all know that. So you have an economic recovery in every cycle, and the job market is lagging this by possibly up to 2 or 3 years. So that the situation is that GDP is rising. It might be rising very fast next year, and the job market outlook is deteriorating. I don't think it poses a problem for journalism to cover that story. It's a headline writing, whether you say good GDP numbers and then say, you know, bad job markets or the other way around. I don't think it matters. People know that. I think the more complicated stories, I actually disagree with you when you all say that's going to get worse and then it's going to get better. I think the opposite. I think it's going to get better, then it's going to get a lot worse. Because what I see is going to happen, I think he's going to see a very strong recovery, very much sort of a bubble, another bubble, that might then burst in 2 or 3 years, and then we'll have a real problem, because then we lack the public finances to deal with that bubble in the way we dealt with the other bubble. So there are a number of sort of parallel stories as we're getting out of this twilight of this crisis into that's why it is a confusing situation. I think that the reporting reflects that confusion.
You're almost predicting a double W
Yes.
recovery. That's scary. It goes on up and down a lot. Dean?
Yeah, I was going to, maybe channeling Danny Schechter on this, but I was going to say that, you know, that's a good question. How do you do the same story over and over again? And the Journal today has a good story about what happens after your severance runs out if you're an executive. And it's, you know, a long story, and it's hard to retell over and over. But I would say, and this is something that I think Danny articulates very well, is that one of the, if there were a couple of big misses in the run-up to the crisis, one was, of course, was this crime issue, but the other one was these wild and growing imbalances in the U.S. economy between people who had and people who didn't. I mean, that sort of laid the groundwork for this explosion. That drove up the number of subprime people, and it decreased their ability to pay back those crummy loans. And somehow I think if this is where the kind of a big news organization can take on these, try and at least take a run at some of these systemic problems that underlie this thing, because the next couple of years there will be a lot of hard luck stories, but if you can really kind of go beyond those, hard luck, it's tough, this guy's having a tough time, he sent out 3,000 resumes, all those things that are really a bummer to read all the time, and try to really intelligently address sort of the policy issues and the structural stuff that got us here. I think that would be a way for financial journalism to shine.
Our great leader, George W. Bush, spoke about the haves and the have-mores. And he said the have-mores are my base, my political base. But I think, you know, this inequality, this notion of a recovery in an economy that's now restructured around